Hi everyone, I wanted to do a really quick video to add to the final review that I have created for you in the PowerPoint movies. I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about the specifics of the test, kind of go over the logistics of the tests and what kind of the amount of questions you're going to see for each particular section. So first things first, all the information as far as the logistics of the final is in the announcement section in on the Blackboard page. You're going to have 2 hours to complete the final. It's totally reasonable to do this in 2 hours. All the questions are going to be relatively simple. They're going to test the major concepts as you see here. So everything's multiple choice. The test is not going to be any different than anything that you've already seen. So let's talk about the final review. So on this first page of the review that you have, so here's a final review sheet, and then I break down each of these little bits of information into, maybe I'll make this just see if I can get it just a bit bigger. There we go. Into 4 separate kind of little presentations that you guys can view online. So the first page of the sheet, numbers 1 through 8, effectively is 20 points on the test. So there's going to be about 2 questions on whether it's a nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio variable, 2 on independent and dependent variable, 1 on independent and dependent variable, 1 on crime rate, 1 on your mean, median, and mode. So you're going to have to do each one of those, 1 for each of the range, standard, deviation, and variance. For your probability, you're going to have to read the table, and it's going to be questions like how many people, if using the table on the 3rd page, for example, how many people live in Louisville and have been a victim of crime. So you just find where those two meet, and there you go, it's 125. So a question like that, how to do each of these probabilities, the addition rule, the multiplication rule, and a conditional probability. Reading the z-table, ignore the t-table. You're going to need to know that, but I'm going to ask it of you in the context of confidence intervals and hypothesis tests. In reading the z-table, you're primarily just going to need to know the area below the mean and the area between the mean and z. For confidence intervals, it's going to be 2 questions, and it's going to be exactly like you saw in the last test, where I give you a prompt and you construct the upper bound or the lower bound of a confidence interval. Hypothesis test, you're going to have about 3 questions, and they'll be on things like what's your alternative hypothesis, what's your test statistic, and what's your decision, do you reject or fail to reject, for example. So that's 20 questions. So you can see that while this is the bulk of the test, there's only a little, I'm not going to ask you a ton of questions about the mean. I'm just going to ask you just these things generally. So my suggestion to you would be to very much structure your notes so that you can find this information quickly and you can just go to it. Many of you already probably know what the mean is off the top of your head, so you might not even need to look that up. And I am going to ask it in a very basic way. You'll see, for example, for measures of central tendency, you'll see, find the mean for this set of numbers, 10, 12, 11, 15, and 10, for example. And that's exactly what a question is going to look like. There's a couple of errors on the final review sheet that I want to point out. First of all, the types of variables here, we've got 4 different types of variables: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Well, after thinking about this for a while, I've decided that it's probably very difficult for you guys to distinguish between interval variables and ratio variables. So for your choices, when I give you, tell me what level of measurement this variable is, you're going to see something along the lines of, tell me what level of measurement this variable is, the number of dollars in your wallet. And that's a ratio variable because 0 is a true value. It's a true 0. 0 means you have no money in your wallet. But your options are going to be A, nominal, B, ordinal, and C, interval or ratio. So if you can't distinguish between the two of those, that's totally fine. It's just going to be C. So just know that I'm not going to do that hard distinction between interval and ratio variables. Additionally, for crime rates, the number of when you go ahead and calculate the crime rate, and I didn't do it here, I will tell you what to standardize by, so you don't have to worry about that. Additionally, for confidence intervals and hypothesis tests, I'll always tell you what level to construct a confidence interval. I'll always tell you what level of significance to do a hypothesis test by, so you won't necessarily have to worry about those. So if we go down to the next page, we see chi-squares, phi coefficients, and Cramer's V. So what I'm going to do here is this is 15 questions on the test. So you're going to see a question or two saying, tell me what the row marginal is for Lexington. I'm going to ask you to tell me what your expected frequencies are for a particular cell. So, for example, when you go ahead and construct your expected frequencies, I'll say, what's your expected frequency for the cell Lexington? And yes, so this particular cell right here. I'll ask you about what are the variables in the table. Oops, sorry, wrong direction. And here we're looking at city versus if they've been a victim of crime. So the two variables are city versus victim of crime. I'll ask you how to calculate the chi-square and finding the chi-square critical value on your chi-square table. And that should be really simple. And the main thing that you really need to know there, if you haven't picked it up from the lectures already, is on this particular test, I'm not going to give you a table that's larger than 2 by 2 or 2 by 3. So as long as you know where to find those critical values, depending on what your significance level are, it's the first two rows in the chi-square table, you're good to go. And then finally, how to make a decision about your chi-square test. And remember that a chi-square test is skewed. So there's no there's no negative values. So as long as your chi-square that you got that you calculated is larger than your chi-square critical value, you're always going to reject the null hypotheses. Then you're going to need to know the phi coefficient and how to interpret it, whether it's weak, moderate, or strong, and same with Cramer's V, how to calculate and how to interpret. And this is going to be 15 points of the test. So obviously, I'm going to ask you multiple questions about spotting marginals and how to calculate a chi-square and things like that. So this is where you probably want to do the most of your studying, simply because I'm going to be asking you multiple types of these questions, whereas the other section, I'm going to be asking you only a couple of, only one or two questions in each type. So that's about it as far as kind of the details of the final. This plus this worksheet plus the 4 PowerPoint presentations, you guys should be golden for the final. There should be no surprises in the types of questions. You've seen them all with the exception of the chi-square stuff, but it's what your homework looks like. And once the homework closes, which is tomorrow, I'll put up the homework answers so that you can have something to review for your homework. If you have any problems, please email me and I'll be happy to help.